Well, there were two big Royal Caribbean ship news in the last week that I wanted to talk about, and chief among them, the Discovery class. Royal Caribbean hasn't made any formal announcements, but as part of their earnings filings with the SEC, which they're required to do because they're a publicly traded company, they disclose the approximate berths for the Discovery class ships. So this is really our first look at how big these new ships are going to be. Remember, the Discovery class is the new class ships, comes out in 2029 and 2032. Those are the first two ships that have been ordered. They're unnamed currently, and Royal Caribbean really hasn't said much about them other than they're a new class and they'll be smaller than the Icon class. Now, we've done podcast episodes about this in the past here, talking about what we think it'll be. And now we probably know that it's going to be what I'm going to give myself credit on this one. It's going to be not as small as some people would have imagined or hoped for, because, and we'll get into that in a second. But anyway, the approximate berths is 4,300. And now remember, berths are passengers on board, and that assumes double occupancy. So if the ship only had two people in every cabin on board, it would have 4,300, which puts it a little bit bigger than Freedom of the Seas and just about the size of Odyssey of the Seas in terms of capacity. We don't know what the ship looks like. We don't know the dimensions, how big, tall, wide, anything like that. All we know is the approximate passenger capacity. Now, before you all get your pitchforks and lanterns out, I mean, actually, this won't solve that problem, but I was going to say is that the approximate berths are not necessarily indicative of anything. In fact, when the Icon class were first ordered, the size was different initially until later on, somebody at Royal Caribbean was like, hey, let's make this the biggest cruise ship in the world. Because initially, the Icon class was not heralded as going to be the next new biggest ship in the world. It actually initially had a smaller size, and then through whatever means, Royal Caribbean decided to actually increase that. And now it is the biggest ship. So what I'm trying to tell you is these SEC filings are not necessarily indicative of anything. It's just something that gives us our first hint. Now, if you were somebody who was hoping, betting, praying for the Discovery class ships to be the size of, say, a Vision class ship, it's not. And Royal Caribbean probably put itself in this corner because they talked about the fact that it'll be a smaller ship, meaning, and that's a relative term, but they didn't define that. And they also talked about the fact that they wanted to replace the aging Vision class. And so some people took those two statements and correlated it together to basically mean, oh, that means they're going to be a smaller ship that's going to like similar size, and it's definitely not. As I mentioned, it's about the size of Odyssey of the Seas. Odyssey of the Seas is 4,198 passengers at double occupancy. It actually tops out at 5,500 at maximum occupancy. That's another fact we don't know yet what it'll be, but that could indicate a lot. I mean, that's basically a decent sized cruise ship today. It's smaller than the Icon, smaller than the Oasis, but based on double occupancy, it comes in right in that, big but not mega big. Not that like the Quantum class ships aren't mega ships to begin with, because they are, but in the grand scheme of Royal Caribbean ships today, that's kind of where they are. Personally, I'm not the least bit surprised by this. I assumed for a while now it'd be right around that 4,000 passenger mark, and that is indeed where it landed. Now, beyond that, I'd be curious to see a couple things. Number one, Royal Caribbean has said in the past it will be able to fit through the Panama Canal. In fact, Michael Bailey said that at last year's President's Cruise. So you've got an idea of what can fit through the Panama Canal size-wise. Keeping in mind, by the way, Disney Cruise Line's newest ship, I believe, just set a new record for the size of a ship. But I believe 200,000 gross tons is passable through there. Again, with everything with cruise ships, passenger count and gross tonnage aren't necessarily the end-all be-all of how you can judge how big a ship is, because gross tonnage, remember, is a measure of internal volume, and the passenger count can be skewed all over the place. Really, this is a question of, how wide the ship will be and versus how tall it'll be, and you can have all sorts of possibilities when you start to extrapolate that. It's my opinion that Royal Caribbean is going to be building these ships to make more money in routes that, relatively speaking, smaller ships currently have to go to, like the Adriatic, Alaska, and other places that are more exotic or more destination-based, and they're not full year-round routes, that a Discovery class ship could offer that, and they would move between regions to offer, basically, because it's a new ship, you would pay more money to go on the Discovery class ship than you would on, say, a Vision class ship. I think that's their end game here. They want to have something that can do, some of these ports. You might be saying, well, Matt, wait a minute. What about Baltimore? What about Tampa? What about this one little small port that only Rhapsody and other Vision class ships can get into? Royal Caribbean will probably just write them off. I hate to say it, but that's kind of the reality. Now, things can change. New bridges can be built, and all of a sudden, you've got a new opportunity. So it's not to say they'll never come back, but I do believe that Royal Caribbean has to focus on its future and where its ships can go and focusing on that. And while I'm sure they value the people who love sailing out of Tampa, Baltimore, or visiting, tinier cruise ports around the world, they're still going to offer a quality experience, just maybe in a different way. Not to mention the fact that the Vision and Radiance class ships are still here, and we're still talking about the earliest is 2029 when Discovery of the Seas, we assume that's the name anyway, comes out. So you've got you still have, I'm going to guess, at least 10 years left in the Vision class here. I would be fairly surprised if they sold them off before, the second Discovery class ship came out, which is not until 2032. I think they're still going to serve a purpose. So again, I could be wrong on this, but I still see a little bit more lifespan. Plus, the Radiance class, I think, will still be here for a little bit while longer. They're a few years newer, relatively, than the Vision class. So it's not like, they're jettisoning all the old ships like overnight, and this is all going to be the new future. It's not quite the new world order yet of bigger ships. It's more of a, here's our long-term plan. Speaking of big ships, well, it comes to probably no one's surprise that Royal Caribbean is ordering even more Icon-class ships. In fact, there's going to be now up to 7 Icon-class ships. Royal Caribbean placed orders last week for Icon 6 and Icon 7. They actually had options for these. The options are basically like a hold your spot in line when basically they'll come back and decide later on if they actually want to exercise that. The advantage of having an option is that it keeps their place in line, so to speak, for construction of the ship. The 2 new ships will be delivered in 2029 and 2030, and that'll mean there'll be 7, at least as of right now, 7 Icon class. There will be 7 Oasis class, and that will basically top out the biggest ship classes Royal Caribbean's ever had. I mean, it's significant to have that many, but it really does speak to the popularity. I mean, this is something we talk about a lot in terms of the demand that Royal Caribbean has, the popularity it has, and why they price things the way they do. It all funnels back to one key thing. There are people out there who are booking it and buying it and loving it. Now, I love the Icon class. I think they are a revelation. I think not only are they the new standard within the cruise industry, but it is definitely even a new standard within the fleet. Like, when I go on an Icon class ship, it feels amazing because of these little and big innovations that have been introduced there. And even going on an Oasis class ship, not that I have a bad time on an Oasis class ship, but like I miss certain things, right? The efficiency of the elevators in an Icon class ship, the Aquadome market, the fact that the Aquadome is indoors, the 2-story Royal Promenade that's wide and big, the views that you get in Pearl Cafe, heck, Pearl Cafe itself and the food selection there. I mean, there are so many things that Royal Caribbean got right with the Icon class that it's certainly not surprising to me at all. It would have been more surprising had they not ordered Icon 6 and 7. And let's be real. I mean, I could see them ordering even more because if they're making money, if you're producing a product that's doing so well, why wouldn't you go buy? There's no limit to how many ships you can have in a fleet. Now, keeping in mind, of course, while I say all this, we have the Discovery class. Okay, that's not really meant to augment the Icon class, but there's that other project. You guys remember, we talked about this before on the podcast, the Royal Caribbean said, I believe when they placed the order for Icon 5, I believe, which is Hero of the Seas, they mentioned that they had a new groundbreaking ship class that was being in development at the Meyer Turku shipyard in Finland. Now, at the time, we assumed, that's the Discovery class. But now we know, no, the Discovery class is being built in France at the Chantiers de l'Atlantique shipyard. So there's something else on the horizon there. And perhaps by the time you get to 2030, which is, 4 years from now, and 7 ships, they might be ready for something different. So, then again, as I say, I could see them building more than 7 Icon class. Maybe not. But it is a safe bet. I mean, that's something it's like sequels in movies, right? Why does Hollywood generate, how many are they even up to for the Fast and the Furious movies and whatnot? Because it's a safe bet. Because they know they're going to make a certain amount of money with it. It's probably going to perform well. People will be happy with it, blah, 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 blah. And you end up with a quality product in that. It's not groundbreaking when you get to the 7th, 8th, 9th version of the film. But you know what? It checks the boxes, right? Especially the financial ones. And I think Royal Caribbean to some extent has that. I mean, not that they're afraid to obviously try new things. They can't just build Icon class ships for the end of time, but there is that temptation, that attraction to building those ships. Anyway, I think it's really interesting where we're sitting. We're in 2026. And as you get to 2030, which sounds like, and if you're like, me, you're like 2030, that's so long from now. I mean, that's 4 years from now, and less than that. We're 3.5 years from now, basically from that point. And when that comes out, you're going to have a really different Royal Caribbean fleet, in terms of dominated by not just Oasis class, which is kind of the case today, but definitely the case, and the Icon class as well. And you're gonna have the Discovery class on the horizon, right? Coming out in 2029, one already out and the other one in 32. It's gonna be busy. I mean, that's the other thing. As I'm thinking about this now, holy smokes, not only are we gonna have like a new cruise ship a year, we're gonna get into the territory pretty soon of having 2 ships a year. Remember when that was a big deal when Odyssey and Wonder came out? I was like, whoa, or actually it was Star and Utopia, or Icon and Utopia came out in the same year. Odyssey and Wonder came out, I think, within 12 months of each other, but in different calendar years. Anyway, those seemed like anomalies. And now, I mean, look at 2029. You're going to have Icon 6 and Discovery 1 coming out in the same year for sure. There's going to be an overlap with Oasis 7 and one of the Icon class ships. So there's some things happening here, and it's going to be very, very busy. And like I said, the look of the fleet is going to fundamentally change. And not necessarily for the worse. I mean, I don't want Royal Caribbean to be a museum of cruise ships. I think it's important to innovate, to change. This is what I love about Royal Caribbean going back many, many years, is that they're willing to try new things and push boundaries and get out there. And while we all have favorite ships that are aging gracefully, and we don't want to see them go, at the same time, this is the business of cruising. And I am always excited for new ships because they always introduce new things. I'm really curious to see. I mean, this Discovery class, I'm really curious to see, like, when we get to 2029, we get on board the ship and how it feels. But I think a lot of it is going to be not a rehash of the Quantum class, but a kind of new take on that size of trying to offer something that goes beyond what they're looking at, but also serves a specific, function, if you will. But I'm be very curious how outward facing or insulated it is, and there's still a lot of questions left. Don't get me wrong, and that means lots of podcast episodes to talk about it, but it is interesting because we have a few more tidbits we did before. All right, friends, time to answer listener emails. Our first email is from Drew. Hey, Matt, I'm in my early 20s and I've been going on cruises my whole life. My wife has never been on a cruise and I've never had an interest in going one until we met. I'm hoping that in the next year or two, I'll be able to take her on her first cruise in the Caribbean. What ship class, itinerary, and time of year would you suggest for us? If you have any other tips that would make her first cruise special, let me know. Love the podcast. Thanks for all you do. Drew, thanks for the email. It's a good one, actually. Good question. I think there's a lot of arguments here. I'm sure people are yelling at their phones right now. Drew, you should take them on this ship. I generally like to start off with a new cruiser to take them on the latest and greatest. I would recommend an Icon class ship. I would also recommend a winter cruise, Drew, like between the months of December and April. The reason being is, I mean, the Caribbean's a lovely place to visit year-round, but when it's really hot and humid, it's less amazing to visit. I would love for you if you could take her on like a January or a February cruise when the humidity isn't nearly as brutal as it can be later in the year. It's still warm. You actually get, the other benefit is, I don't know where you live, Drew, but if you live anywhere, north of South Carolina, you've got basically, I'm assuming you're an American, you would have lovely weather and escape from winter, all those good things. You want to lean into, I think, what people want out of a tropical vacation, in this case, a cruise. So yeah, I would do it doesn't matter Eastern or Western, but maybe Western Caribbean, in late winter. February is a good time of year, and on one of the Icon class ships. I feel like that would be a good start for you and hopefully endear her to cruising as well. Next email is from Rich Irwin from Long Island, New York. Good morning, Matt. I have a few questions for my next cruise, which is the Legend of the Seas group cruise in November. My wife, daughter, and I are super excited to go on our first group cruise and our first Icon class ship. Sad we're no longer going to Labadee, but I know it's always a possibility with Haiti. Now for the questions. Number one, does it usually take this long for Royal Caribbean to update shore excursions when there's an itinerary change? Yes. It takes them forever. It's especially if you got a lot of time to go with it. So it's very common, unfortunately. So with the Legend of the Seas group cruise, which is happening, by the way, in November, anybody can join us for it. Just go to royalcaribbeanblog.com/events. for more information. We were originally supposed, I think originally we were going to Coco Key, Labadee, Falmouth, and maybe somewhere else. And then we lost Labadee, obviously, very quickly. And then we were left with like an itinerary, and they placed it with the sea day. So I think our itinerary literally was going to be Falmouth, Jamaica, and Coco Key, and 5 sea days. Anyway, Royal Caribbean rerouted us over to the Western Caribbean, and now we're doing that one instead. And when an itinerary change like that happens, yeah, it takes a while for them to get it going over there for tours. I would argue you really don't need a Royal Caribbean tour in November. Or you don't need a Royal Caribbean tour in Cozumel, I should say. November is still a good time to use a tour. But I mean, Cozumel's got so much going on independently. As you all know, I'm a big fan of Paradise Beach, which is an independent option over there. So just keep that in mind. Back to Rich's email. Next, I'm leaning towards not getting the ultimate dining package for this cruise. I believe if you get the package, you cannot reserve certain restaurants, especially the Supper Club and Royal Railway, until you board the ship. I imagine on a 6-day sailing, these will sell out before we even get on board. With people who didn't get the dining package, will there be any openings left? You can actually do both, Rich. So your assumption is probably correct. I would agree with you on that. But you could actually do it this way. What you could do is book the dining package, and then separately book, the Supper Club or Royal Railway. Okay, when you get on board the ship, go to guest services to explain what you did, and they'll refund you the difference. Obviously, you still have to pay a fee to dine there, even with the dining package, but they'll refund you the difference of the money you paid. This happens I've done this many times in the past, where I booked like Izumi Hibachi, and knowing back then it was very hard to get into it, so I make a full reservation and then convert it over to my dining package later on. Richard said, third, it's my understanding that the main dining room will have Thanksgiving dinner options to any specialty restaurants that acknowledge Thanksgiving as Coastal Kitchen. Coastal probably does. They probably will have a special menu there. But for the other restaurants, no. If you go to Izumi, Chops, they're going to have the standard menu there. On an actual holiday, sometimes I should amend this answer. I have seen, like, as an example, Chops Grill on Valentine's Day has a Valentine's Day menu. For Thanksgiving, they may have a special option or two, but you can't bet on it. That's the only thing. So if you really want to have turkey and all that, you definitely want to go to the main dining room for that option. Next email is from Yuna. Hey, Matt, we're going on Icon of the Seas in the peak of spring break in March of 2027. I've been reading trip reports from people coming back from spring break trips this year, and some are saying the crowds were crazy. 45 minutes for water slides, long wait to check kids into Adventure Ocean, etc. Some people say Icon-class ships feel less crowded than Oasis-class ships, but not sure if that applies to a spring break season. We sailed on Oasis-class ships twice in Easter breaks. Both were in April, not March, and they were just fine, and I usually reserve things in advance. Should I be concerned? What makes me nervous is mostly the Adventure Ocean craziness and the competition for the shows or getting a table to Windjammer. Would I not have a good experience? Wonder if we should switch dates to a better experience for the money. Well, I guess the first question I have for you is, why are you going in March if you don't have kids? I assume you booked spring break because you had kids. If you don't, I mean, yes and no. I mean, yes, you might have a few less families. I mean, it's still an Icon-class ship. There's still going to be thousands of them. But, you might have a little bit less if you pick a cruise like this week right now, in the beginning of May. But that being said, it's not going to be materially different. And that also will leave you a hole in your calendar for nothing happening in March. So I'm never one to take away cruises. I'm one to add more cruises. All right, here's the reality. Everything you heard is sort of true, and everything you want is also sort of true. So what do I mean by that? 45 minutes for water slides. Yes, do you know when those are, Yuna? Right in the late morning, early afternoon, on a sea day when the sun is shining and it's absolute peak demand. Yes. But there are other times you go on the water slides. As an example, I always recommend, this is true for all ships with water slides, go on embarkation day. Bring your bathing suit with you or wear it for all that I care. But then as soon as you get on board the ship, go to the water slides. There'll be no line there. You can enjoy that for pretty much the whole of the early afternoon there. Long ways to check kids in Adventure Ocean. Adventure Ocean, the evening session opens at 7 p.m. There can be a line to check people in because they do it one at a time, maybe two at a time if you're lucky. I mean, it's a fast-moving line. Usually, it goes pretty quickly. There's one person checking in people at a time, although if you're lucky, maybe you'll get two. But as long as everybody did what they're supposed to do and register their children for Adventure Ocean in the afternoon out at 7 o'clock, it moves quicker than it looks. I mean, even in the heyday when nothing was digital, when my kids were back in there, even with a line, so to speak, I mean, it was like 10, 15 minutes maximum. It's just a matter of just getting through people and checking them all in and all that. So here's what I would tell you. I mean, it's Royal Caribbean, it's an Icon-class ship, a lot of families. Do I think you should avoid your March cruise? No. Will there be more families on board because it's spring break than there would be another month? Yes. Do I think you need to change your plans? No. I think it's going to be a healthy mix of passengers of all ages, and yes, it's Royal Caribbean, there are going to be kids on board. but I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing ever, and these ships are designed to be sailing full. The cruise ship in any other month you pick is going to be full, 100% capacity as well. The difference is just more kids per se on this particular one, assuming you pick the right week, because remember, spring break is not 1 week. It begins really after President's Day and extends all the way through Easter. Different school districts have different breaks, so it's not like you're going on 1 week in which every single school will be out. There's a bit of a mix there. But I wouldn't be nervous about it. It just requires what you're doing already, which is planning ahead, coming up with a good schedule. Most people who run into the worst lines are the ones who don't plan ahead. They're the ones that roll out of bed at 11:30 a.m., go over to the water slide. They're like, what? At noon on a sea day? There's a line here? Who could have foreseen this? And these are also the same people who roll into the Windjammer at 9:30 in the morning, which is peak time. And they're like, what? Everyone else wants to eat breakfast at 9 a.m.? Who could have seen this? It's just a matter, you should know. Again, I talked about the water slide hack earlier. You could also actually come back to the ship after a day in the island somewhere. Usually the lines are much shorter as well. For the Windjammer, try to eat breakfast earlier or later. Go to an alternative venue if, the main dining room is open, and they rarely have any problems with waits over there for breakfast. So there are workarounds. There are options out there. So I wouldn't fear it, but I would have a plan and, an idea of what to expect once you're on board the ship. That's the most important thing. And our last question today is from David from Hudson Valley. Greetings from New York. First, thank you again for your work. Really, really is appreciated as cruise fans who love to see the ocean blue. I live in New York and about a 15-minute drive from Cape Liberty cruise port. Last year, my wife convinced me after 10 years of flying to Florida to try a Northeast cruise to Florida and enjoy the step off and on to your own car ride home feeling Floridians enjoy. Sailing on Symphony in Oasis class from home was amazing. Got my hopes of possibly seeing an Icon class ship there one day, sailing north. I did a little research and saw that both Oasis and Icon ships have to sail under the Great Belt Bridge after construction, which has never have a lower height than Verrazano. With the fleet of Icon class ships growing, and recently Galveston gaining Icon in 27, does your Magic Ball show an Icon class coming to New York in the near future? Thank you again for you and your team and family lending you to explore for us. Thank you, David, for the email. I mean, if I've learned one thing from Royal Caribbean, it's that never say never. Because when I started this blog, and for many years, people talked about the fact there'll never be an Oasis class in New York, and then one day there was. Royal Caribbean never says never themselves, even when they pull out of a market. California, they didn't have any ships there for 10 years, and then all of a sudden they got like 4 now. Things change, markets change, and the other reality is sometimes it's just a matter of engineering or figuring out some math in order to make it work. So far be it from me to ever say to you, David, there was no chance of an Icon class ship going to New York. You're absolutely right about the math in terms of how many ships there are in the fleet or will be in the fleet, plus, the realities of the ports. But I'm with you, buddy. I think, you got a chance. Not a great one, but in the words of Dumb and Dumber, so you're telling me there's a chance. Yes, I am. All right, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining us here. Of course, you can always email me your questions if you have them. Matt, M-A-T-T, at RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com. Thanks again for listening. This has been Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com. We'll talk again real soon.